The frail, elderly man stood before the court in handcuffs, his weathered face downcast. When Judge Christine Warren glanced at his file, the color drained from her face. No one expected what happened next. William Harris, 80, hunched his shoulders beneath a tattered military jacket, several sizes too large. The harsh fluorescent lights of Courtroom 5 accentuated the deep lines carved across his once proud face by time and hardship. For decades earlier, he'd stood tall in dress greens, a green beret with decorations gleaming on his chest. Today, he waited for judgment in clothes acquired from a shelter donation bin. The bailiff called his case number. Docket 237, County versus William Harris. Trespassing, disturbance of peace. William shuffled forward, his movement stiff from arthritis and old war injuries that had never properly healed. Vietnam first, then later deployments with special forces. Wounds both visible and invisible carried silently through the decades. Mr. Harris, began the prosecutor, a young woman with perfect teeth and a tailored suit, has been repeatedly warned about loitering in Memorial Hospital's parking garage. Security has filed 3 complaints this month alone. What the prosecutor didn't mention was that William had only been sitting quietly near the parking garage's heating vents, warming himself on particularly cold nights. He never panhandled, never bothered anyone, just sought a moment's warmth when January temperatures plunged below freezing. The hospital was significant to him for reasons he kept to himself. It was where he'd been treated after returning from his last deployment, before everything fell apart. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, this is a defendant's 3rd citation. We recommend community service and a 30-day no trespass order for the medical district. Officer Raymond testified next. Found the defendant in level B of the parking garage at 2:15 a.m. He refused to vacate when instructed. William hadn't refused. He'd simply asked for 5 more minutes to finish the sandwich a night nurse had secretly given him. But arguing seemed pointless now, as it had then. A no trespass order would mean no access to the Veterans Outreach Clinic on 3rd Street, the only medical care William had known in years. It would mean no meals at the hospital cafeteria, where a sympathetic staff member sometimes slipped him leftovers. It would mean true isolation in the coldest part of winter. Mr. Harris. Judge Warren addressed him directly. Do you have representation today? William shook his head. The public defender assigned to him had been called to another courtroom for an emergency hearing. Would you like to make a statement on your own behalf? The judge asked, peering over half-moon reading glasses, something unreadable flickering across her features. William cleared his throat, his voice rusty from disuse. No excuses, Your Honor. Just trying to stay warm. Any particular reason you chose that location? The judge pressed, studying him intently. The hospital. William hesitated. I know it. Spent time there when I came home. The garage is warm and it's quiet at night. And your military service, Mr. Harris? Judge Warren asked, though this information wasn't typically relevant in such proceedings. United States Army, 1965 to 1993. 5th Special Forces Group, retired Master Sergeant. The words came automatically, a moment of clarity and pride amid confusion. The judge made a note, then continued reviewing the file. Something in Harris's record seemed to capture her attention, her eyebrows rising slightly as she read. Before she could speak again, the courtroom doors opened. A distinguished man in an expensive suit entered, approaching the public defender's table with purposeful strides. Your Honor, Michael Dennison for the defendant. I apologize for the interruption, but I've been retained to represent Mr. Harris. William looked up in confusion. He hadn't called anyone. Couldn't afford a lawyer, especially not one with a suit that expensive. This is highly irregular, Mr. Dennison, Judge Warren noted, though her voice lacked its usual edge. The court was not informed of this representation. It's a very recent development, Your Honor, Dennison replied smoothly. I would request a brief recess to confer with my client. Judge Warren studied the lawyer, then William, her expression unreadable. The court will take a 15-minute recess, she announced, rising suddenly as she disappeared into her chambers. William turned to the stranger beside him. I don't have money for a lawyer. You don't need any, Dennison replied quietly. The firm of Dennison, Warren, and Mitchell is handling your case pro bono. William frowned at the familiar name. Warren, like the judge? Exactly like the judge. Dennison confirmed with a slight nod. And there's something else you should know. This case is about much more than trespassing. It's about Kandahar, 2009. William's weathered face paled. How do you know about that? In her chambers, Judge Christine Warren removed her glasses with trembling hands. 20 years on the bench had taught her to maintain composure regardless of what appeared before a court, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. It can't be the same man, she whispered to herself, though the details aligned too perfectly. She unlocked her desk drawer and removed a worn photograph, herself as a young woman standing beside her brother, Captain David Warren, in his Army medical uniform, both smiling widely at his deployment ceremony. David's last letter home from Afghanistan sat beside the photo, the paper thin from countless readings. In it, he described a firefight outside Kandahar where his medical unit had been pinned down by Taliban fighters. If not for Master Sergeant Harris, David had written, none of us would have made it out. He ran across open ground under heavy fire to reach me after I was hit trying to treat a wounded soldier. Then he provided covering fire so we could evacuate our wounded. Mom, this man is a definition of courage. 2 weeks after writing that letter, David had been killed when his medical convoy struck an IED. Christine remembered the military funeral, the folded flag presented to her parents, and the Special Forces soldier who had approached them afterward. Your son saved many lives, he'd said. I was the one who trained him for field medicine before that last mission. That soldier's name had been William Harris. Christine had tried contacting him after the funeral, wanting to hear more about her brother's final days, but the military had explained that Sergeant Harris had been redeployed immediately. Later inquiries revealed he'd been honorably discharged after suffering severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury during his final tour. And now, nearly 15 years later, he sat in her courtroom, homeless, alone, and unrecognized. When Judge Warren returned to the courtroom, her posture was impeccable, her expression neutral. Yet those who knew her well might have noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she arranged papers before her. Mr. Dennison, has your client decided how he wishes to proceed? She asked formally. The attorney stood. Your Honor, we request dismissal of all charges. My client was simply seeking shelter from dangerously cold conditions, a basic human necessity. Furthermore, we can demonstrate that Mr. Harris had implied permission from hospital employees to be on the premises. The prosecutor began to object, but Judge Warren raised her hand slightly, silencing her before asking, I have several questions for the defendant. She turned her attention to William, who sat straighter now, a ghost of military bearing visible beneath his frail exterior. Mr. Harris, your military record indicates service in Kandahar during 2009. Is that correct? William nodded, confusion crossing his weathered face. Yes, Your Honor. Special Forces advisory role, attached to a medical unit. And on April 23rd, 2009, were you involved in an operation near the eastern outskirts of the city? William's eyes narrowed, memories visibly washing over him. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a medical team when we came under heavy fire. During that engagement, the judge continued, her voice remarkably steady. Did you rescue a wounded Army doctor, a Captain David Warren, while under enemy fire? The courtroom fell silent. William's eyes grew distant, then sharpened with recognition. Captain Warren, he repeated slowly. Yes, young doctor, good man. He was hit trying to reach a wounded soldier. William's eyes grew distant. I got to him, pulled him behind a wall. He kept telling me to leave him, to get the others out first. In the gallery, a white-haired man in a Veterans of Foreign Wars jacket leaned forward, suddenly intent on the proceedings. And what happened to Captain Warren? Judge Christine Warren asked, her professional mask firmly in place despite the tumble beneath. We got him to the medevac, William replied, his voice dropping. I heard later he recovered. Then a few weeks after, his convoy hit an IED. William's voice cracked slightly. All these years, I've wondered if I'd done more damage than could get him out. only for him to die later. The white-haired veteran in the gallery stood abruptly. "That's him," he announced loudly. "That's Master Sergeant Harris. I was there that day. He saved 8 of us." Judge Warren struck her gavel once, sharply. "Order," she commanded, though her voice lacked its usual authoritativeness. The courtroom quieted, tension humming in the air. William Harris stared at the floor, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interjected, "while Mr. Harris's military service is admirable, it has no bearing on." "The court disagrees," Judge Warren interrupted. "It has every bearing." She set her gavel down deliberately. "This court will take a 10-minute recess. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Harris remains in the courtroom." As she rose to leave, she paused, making unprecedented eye contact with the defendant. "Mr. Harris, when I return, there are matters beyond these charges we need to discuss." When Judge Warren returned exactly 10 minutes later, she was not alone. Behind her walked 3 uniformed Army officers, a full colonel, a major, and a captain carrying a polished wooden case. The courtroom stirred, whispers racing through the gallery. William Harris stood reflexively at the sight of the uniforms, muscle memory overriding his physical discomfort. Judge Warren took her seat and faced the crowded room. For the first time in her judicial career, she removed her glasses completely, setting them aside to address the court not as a judge, but as a human being. "Before proceeding, I must disclose a matter of personal connection to this case," she began. "The Captain David Warren mentioned by the defendant was my brother." A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. William's eyes widened, recognition and confusion battling across his face. 15 years ago, my brother wrote to our family about a Master Sergeant who saved his life in Kandahar, a man who ran through enemy fire to reach him after he was wounded, and who provided covering fire so others could reach safety. That man was Sergeant William Harris. The white-haired veteran called out, "It's true, Your Honor. I was there. Harris got hit twice pulling the doctor to cover." Judge Warren nodded acknowledgement. 2 weeks after that incident, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several soldiers approached our family to share stories of David's courage, but also to tell us about the Master Sergeant who had saved him during that earlier firefight, giving our family 2 more weeks with David that we wouldn't otherwise have had. She looked directly at William now. "After my brother's death, I tried to locate you, Sergeant Harris. The Army informed me you've been redeployed immediately. Years later, they told me you've been discharged, but couldn't share your location." 2 weeks later, William Harris stood before a mirror in an apartment he still couldn't believe was his. The Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program had expedited his case, placing him in a 1-bedroom unit in a complex specifically designed for formerly homeless veterans. The walls were sparse but for one frame, his newly awarded Distinguished Service Cross in a display case alongside his original Purple Hearts and service medals that Michael Dennison had somehow recovered from a storage unit auctioned off years ago after William could no longer afford the payments. The day in court had changed everything. Colonel James Mitchell, David's former commanding officer, had explained that William's file was among thousands flagged for review under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. New information had come to light regarding his service in Afghanistan that warranted reassessment of his decorations and benefit status. By order of the President and in recognition of extraordinary heroism in action on April 23, 2009, the Colonel had announced in court, "The Distinguished Service Cross is hereby awarded to Master Sergeant William J. Harris, United States Army." Intelligence that had remained classified until recently confirmed that Williams' actions that day not only saved Captain Warren and 7 other personnel, but disrupted an ambush that would have likely destroyed the entire medical convoy. His Silver Star had been upgraded accordingly. Now, after decades of struggling with PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and homelessness, William had full medical coverage, housing assistance, and substantial back pay from his corrected disability rating, assessed at 100% service-connected, retroactive to his discharge date. Yet despite these material improvements, William still fought an internal battle. How does a man who has lived on society's margins for decades suddenly step back into the light? The recognition felt undeserved. He had only done what any soldier would do. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Judge Christine Warren stood in the hallway, out of her judicial robes and carrying a small box. "May I come in, Sergeant Harris?" she asked. William ushered her inside, still uncomfortable with his sudden change in circumstances. "Please, just William is fine, Your Honor." "Then I'm just Christine," she replied with a small smile, "at least outside my courtroom." They sat in the small living area, the awkwardness of their unique connection hanging between them. "I brought something I thought you might want to see," Christine said, opening the box and removing a bundle of letters. "These are from David. He wrote our family every week while deployed." She handed one to William. "This one mentions you specifically. It was written the day after you saved him." William's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. Captain Warren's handwriting was neat and precise, just as William remembered from field reports. "Mom and Dad," he read aloud, "don't worry about what you're hearing on the news. I'm safe, thanks to one of the SF guys. Master Sergeant Harris did something yesterday I still can't believe. When our unit was hit, he moved through fire that should have dropped anyone. He wouldn't leave me even when I ordered him to. Said no soldier gets left behind on his watch." William's voice faltered. "He wrote about you often," Christine said softly. "Said you were the kind of soldier he aspired to be." "He was a good officer," William replied. "Young, but he cared about his men. That's rare. After we lost David, I went to law school." Christine gestured to the apartment. "All of this, the Veterans Court program I started, the housing initiative, it began because of what David wrote about you, about how the system fails even its heroes sometimes." William looked away, uncomfortable with such recognition. "I'm no hero, just did what needed doing." "That's what heroes always say," Christine replied gently. She hesitated, then continued. "There's something else you should know. The day David died, he was leading a medical team to treat civilians in a village that had been bombed. He volunteered for the mission. His last letter home said he was trying to live up to the example you set." 3 months later, William sat in a circle with 5 other veterans at the VA center. The youngest was 25, fresh from Afghanistan. The oldest, besides William, was a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran. They were all part of a peer support program that William had reluctantly agreed to join, then eventually volunteered to help lead. "I spent 30 years thinking it didn't matter," William told the group. "That what we did over there, what we sacrificed, was forgotten. I lived on the streets, convinced no one remembered, no one cared." Across town, Judge Warren was addressing the state judicial conference about the Veterans Treatment Court she had established, inspired by William's case. "These are men and women who served their country, then fell to the cracks of the very system they defended," she explained. "Our traditional approach to justice fails to address the underlying issues of PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and the challenges of reintegration. The program was already showing success, diverting veterans from incarceration into treatment and support services. William Harris's case had become its founding story. Not just a hero recognized, but of a broken system finally beginning to acknowledge its responsibility to those who had sacrificed so much. Sometimes, the greatest honor isn't a medal, but simply being remembered. If you believe our veterans deserve recognition and support, not just on holidays, but every day, leave respect in the comments. Share this story to ensure heroes like William aren't forgotten. And subscribe for more stories that remind us what true courage looks like.